We like to think the world we navigate every day operates on a meritocracy, right? We
Okay.
treat it like a vending machine.
Yeah, a vending machine is a great way to put it.
You put in the hard work, you punch the right buttons, you get the degree, you put in the overtime, and out pops a promotion, a successful business, or just a happy relationship.
It is a profoundly comforting illusion
Right.
because it's clean, it's transactional, and it appeals to our innate desire for fairness.
But then you look around, you look at who actually gets ahead in your industry, who truly holds influence in the world, and suddenly you realize that vending machine is broken.
Or rather, it was never a vending machine to begin with.
Exactly. We are looking at a landscape that is honestly more like a shadow play. There are rules, sure, but they aren't the ones printed in the employee handbook.
The rules of human behavior, especially when ambition is involved, rarely operate in the light.
Yeah.
We are essentially playing a game where half the mechanics are entirely invisible, relying on psychology, leverage, and misdirection rather than just, pure competence.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are thrilled you're joining us because today we are venturing into the timeless and, let's be honest, often very uncomfortable realities of human behavior and influence.
Uncomfortable, but necessary.
Highly necessary. We're drawing from a fascinating stack of strategic teardowns to understand how power actually works in practice. We've got a comprehensive book summary of Robert Greene's polarizing work, The 48 Laws of Power, by Graham Mann.
A very detailed breakdown.
We are also pulling from a deeply analytical short-form summary packed with historical case studies, and we're zeroing in on a massive Grokopedia entry dedicated entirely to the intricate mechanics of concealment.
The goal today is really to decode the underlying machinery of influence. Greene didn't invent these laws, He merely cataloged recurring patterns of power that have dictated human interaction for thousands of years.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission isn't to hand you a manipulator's playbook so you can go out and run roughshod over your coworkers.
Right, this isn't a self-help pitch.
Not at all. It's a field manual. The aim is to help you recognize the hidden forces actively shaping your workplace, your relationships, and history itself.
Because by understanding the specific mechanics of these strategies, you build an immunity to them.
Yes, exactly. You learn to spot the tactics being used around you, ensuring you don't become an unwitting pawn in someone else's strategy, because power operates like a current.
You are either swimming with it, aware of its pull, or you are being swept away by it.
To truly grasp these mechanics, we have to look at the environment that perfected them, don't we?
We do. The sources trace these dynamics back over 3,000 years, across ancient China, the Roman Empire, and the Renaissance. But they point out that the laws of power were perhaps most perfectly crystallized in the aristocratic courts of old Europe.
The courtiers constantly circling the king or the queen.
Think about the immense pressure of that environment. You had a highly concentrated group of individuals constantly jockeying for influence around a single absolute source of power. On the surface, these courtiers were required to appear flawlessly civilized. They had to be refined, cultured, and exceedingly polite.
I mean, they couldn't just walk up to a rival and challenge them to a duel right there in the throne room, or demand the king give them a promotion.
No, absolutely not. If they showed overt ambition, their peers would instantly view them as a threat and a line to destroy them.
Which meant they had to smile, bow, and compliment each other while secretly plotting their rival's downfall.
The violence was stripped of its physical form and sublimated into psychological warfare.
When you describe it that way, I can't help but look at a modern, open-plan corporate office and see the exact same architecture.
It really is.
We aren't wearing powdered wigs, but aren't we all just modern courtiers? We send highly polished emails with exclamation points to sound friendly. We attend mandatory team-building retreats.
We use buzzwords like synergy.
Right, synergy company culture.
Yeah.
But beneath all that sterile professionalism, there is a constant quiet jockeying for resources, credit, and promotions. The velvet glove is still there. We just call it professionalism now.
The parallel is strikingly accurate. The corporate hierarchy is essentially a modern royal court. You have the CEO or the board acting as the sovereign, and everyone else is managing their proximity to that power.
I do wonder, though, does viewing our daily lives through this intensely analytical lens actually serve us? It feels like adopting this mindset could easily turn someone into a paranoid, miserable person who suspects their own shadow.
That tension is central to any study of strategy. The text argues that power itself is fundamentally amoral.
Amoral, not immoral.
Exactly. It is neither inherently good nor inherently bad, in the same way that gravity or thermodynamics are amoral. They are simply forces that govern the physical world.
And these laws govern the social world.
Right, so it's about shifting from moral judgment to objective observation. The sources stress that one of the most critical skills a person can acquire is the ability to read circumstances objectively, completely divorced from emotional filters.
Like if a rock falls on your foot, you don't call the rock malicious.
Exactly. You recognize the law of gravity and you learn not to stand under falling rocks. Refusing to acknowledge that these social dynamics exist doesn't exempt you from their effects. It simply leaves you blind and vulnerable to those who do understand them.
Ignorance isn't bliss, it's a massive liability. So if we accept that this game is constantly being played in the background of our lives, what are the most common ways people accidentally blow themselves up before they even get to the starting line?
Looking through our sources, the foundational mistakes almost always come down to mismanaging two incredibly volatile human elements, ego and trust.
That leads directly into the first two laws of the framework, which serve as a masterclass in what not to do.
Right, let's look at Law 1. It's widely considered the absolute foundation of institutional survival. Never outshine the master.
Making a superior feel insecure. We've all seen this happen, but the historical stakes were so much higher.
Oh, historically, making this mistake was fatal to your actual life, not just your career. The sources detail a defining historical example involving King Louis XIV of France and his incredibly ambitious finance minister, Nicolas Fouquet.
Fouquet wanted to impress the king, right? He wanted to solidify his position as the most indispensable man in France.
He genuinely believed he was doing the right thing for his own career. So Fouquet decided to throw an impossibly lavish, spectacular party at his newly constructed chateau.
Go big or go home.
Exactly. He invited the king, the nobility, the brightest minds in Europe. He served the finest food, hired the greatest playwrights to debut new works, and featured a massive fireworks display.
In a meritocracy, Fouquet's logic makes perfect sense. He is signaling to his boss, look at my competence. Look at the vast network of connections I have cultivated. Look at the immense wealth I can generate for this administration.
He thinks he's securing his promotion, but he completely failed to calculate the psychological weight of the king's ego. Louis XIV was the Sun King. He demanded to be the absolute center of the universe.
So the party backfired.
Massively. As the night went on, the sheer magnificence of Fouquet's party didn't impress the king. It humiliated him. It made Louis feel doubly inferior and insecure about his own status.
Because if the finance minister can throw a party that eclipses anything the king has ever hosted, the unspoken question becomes, who is actually in charge?
The king's ego could not tolerate that ambiguity. The result was swift. Fouquet wasn't celebrated. Shortly after the party, he was arrested.
Wow.
He was subjected to a show trial and spent the rest of his life in solitary confinement. Not for treason, not for embezzling, though those were the trumped-up charges, but fundamentally because his display of brilliance made the person holding the power feel diminished.
That dynamic is terrifyingly relatable to anyone who has ever worked in a hierarchy. You can be sitting in a strategy meeting and you pitch a genuinely brilliant idea that totally eclipses your manager's proposal.
You think you are adding value to the company.
But instead of being rewarded or promoted, you suddenly notice you are being slowly managed out of the department. Your projects are reassigned. You stop getting invited to key meetings.
You didn't break any explicit corporate rules.
But you broke the invisible rule. You triggered the boss's insecurity.
The psychological mechanism here is status threat. When a superior feels their status is threatened by a subordinate, their primitive brain reacts as if it's a physical threat.
Wow. So how do you manage that?
The law dictates that if you are naturally brilliant or talented, you must actively dampen your brilliance when dealing with superiors. You must go out of your way to make your masters appear more brilliant than they actually are.
You feed their ego.
Because their ego is the gatekeeper to your advancement.
It's the art of the strategic assist. You set up the play so the boss can slam dunk and take the credit. That secures your position much faster than trying to dunk on the boss.
Exactly. And this misunderstanding of human psychology also bleeds into how we handle our peers, which brings us to the second massive vulnerability, who we choose to trust.
Law 2.
Right. Law 2 states, never put too much trust in friends, learn how to use enemies.
Now that sounds incredibly cold. If you tell someone to stop trusting their friends and start employing their adversaries,
Yeah.
they're going to look at you like you're completely detached from reality.
On the surface, it sounds antisocial. But when you drill into the psychological ledger of relationships, it reveals a profound truth about human nature in competitive environments. The texts argue that friends often conceal their true feelings to avoid conflict.
Right.
If you bring a close friend into a business venture or hire them, the existing dynamic is irreparably altered.
Because the baseline of friendship is equality,
Right.
mutual affection. The moment you introduce a hierarchy where one friend is paying the other or one is the boss, you introduce structural inequality.
Precisely. The friend who is hired might hide their incompetence to avoid disappointing you. Or, far more dangerously, they develop a hidden, festering envy.
Envy is a powerful motivator.
It is. Receiving a favor or a job from a friend unbalances the relationship. The friend feels a strained, complex mixture of entitlement because of the past friendship and burdened gratitude.
It becomes an emotional debt that they resent having to pay back. Every time you give them a directive, they aren't hearing it from a boss. They are hearing it from a peer who suddenly thinks they are better than them.
Former enemies or rivals, however, operate on a completely different psychological footing. If you can co-opt a former adversary, they often become more loyal and effective than a friend.
Because they have everything to prove.
Yes. Their entire standing in your circle depends entirely on proving their newfound loyalty and their professional competence. There is no murky emotional history.
Our sources provide an incredibly vivid historical case study for this, involving Emperor Sung and King Shu in ancient China. The setup here is straight out of a thriller.
It really is.
Emperor Sung has consolidated power, but he has a bitter rival, King Shu, who had previously plotted against him.
In that era, the standard operating procedure for dealing with a rival who plotted against you was immediate, brutal execution.
So Emperor Sung invites King Shu to his palace. If you are King Shu, you are walking through those palace doors, sweating bullets. You are expecting assassins behind every tapestry.
He is bracing for his own execution. The cognitive load on King Shu in that moment would be staggering.
But the trapdoor never opens. Instead, Emperor Sung treats him with incredible honor. He wines and dines him. He throws a lavish banquet specifically to honor Shu.
The psychological whiplash Shu must have felt is insane.
Right. And then, the true masterstroke happens at the end of the visit. Sung sends Shu home with a sealed package as a parting gift.
When King Shu finally opens that package, he doesn't find gold or silk. He finds a thick stack of documents.
Wait, what were the documents?
It was undeniable, meticulously gathered written evidence of Shu's own conspiracy to overthrow Emperor Sung.
Sung had all the proof he needed to justify executing Shu the entire time. He held all the cards.
But by letting Shu go unharmed and presenting him with the evidence of his own spared life, Sung completely flipped the power dynamic.
He didn't just defeat an enemy, he performed a kind of psychological alchemy. By demonstrating his absolute power, the ability to eliminate Shu at any moment, coupled with strategic mercy, he turned a bitter rival into his most fiercely loyal follower.
Shu realized his ongoing existence was a daily gift from Sung. If Sung had simply executed Shu, he might have created a martyr and sparked a rebellion among Shu's followers. By converting him, he absorbed Shu's power into his own network.
Okay, I have to pause here. How do we translate this into our daily lives without becoming deeply suspicious, isolated people? Are we supposed to look at our best friends and see them as liabilities? Should I be recruiting the guy who tried to sabotage my presentation last quarter?
The lesson isn't to abandon friendship. It is to strictly compartmentalize personal affection from professional utility. The text warns us that blending the two almost always leads to structural failure.
So, clarity over comfort.
Yes. When you work with a professional rival, you know exactly what they want. They know exactly what you want. The relationship thrives on competence, output, and aligned incentives, not on a murky sense of emotional obligation.
That makes a lot of sense.
Keep your friends for your weekends, for your personal support system. But in the arena, rely on the skilled, even if you don't personally like them.
You rely on people whose self-interest aligns perfectly with your success. You keep your personal life personal, but when you are navigating a competitive hierarchy, you need people who are motivated by proving their worth.
Which serves as the perfect bridge to the next major paradigm shift in our sources. If we must assume that our peers are driven by self-interest, and we must constantly manage the fragile egos of our superiors, then absolute transparency is no longer a virtue.
It's actually a liability.
A massive, glaring vulnerability.
This is where we get to the core of the playbook. We have a massive Grokipedia entry in our sources, dedicated entirely to the nuances of one specific strategy. Law 3. Conceal your intentions.
If there is a single law that defines the successful acquisition and maintenance of power, this is it. The core of this strategy is keeping people perpetually off balance and in the dark by using ambiguity, decoys, and smokescreens.
It's information asymmetry.
At its most weaponized. If your opponents do not know what your actual goal is, they cannot calculate a defense against it. You guide them down a false path, you envelop them in a fog of misleading signals, and by the time they realize what your true objective is, you have already secured it.
It is too late for them to react.
Exactly.
The historical case studies for this are wild, and they span centuries. Let's look at John Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough, in 1711. He's a legendary military leader fighting the French. He captures a French fort.
Now, standard military logic says when you capture an enemy fort, you either demolish it so the enemy can't take it back, or you garrison it and hold it.
Churchill does neither. He captures it and begins aggressively, visibly reinforcing it. He pours resources into the fort.
He makes it look like this specific fort is the absolute crown jewel of his entire campaign strategy, the linchpin of his defense.
He turns the fort into a massive architectural decoy.
Right. And the French commanders look at this activity and they deduce, if Churchill is spending this much energy reinforcing that fort, it must be vital to his plans. We have to stop him from holding it.
So the French amass their forces, attack the fort, and ultimately destroy it themselves.
But Churchill never actually cared about holding the fort.
Not even a little bit.
Well,
By tricking the French into attacking and destroying their own former fort, they literally cleared a massive physical obstacle out of Churchill's actual path for a deeper invasion into French territory.
he manipulated his enemy's defensive instincts to do his own demolition work for him.
It's misdirection on a grand scale, leveraging the enemy's assumptions against them. We see a similar, deeply psychological application of this with Haile Selassie in Ethiopia during the 1920s.
This one is fascinating because it doesn't use military force at all. Selassie needed to neutralize a very powerful, rebellious rival general. Now, Selassie could have marched his army out to meet the general in open combat.
But battles are inherently unpredictable. They are bloody, expensive, and you risk losing your own life.
So instead of a battlefield, Selassie creates a smokescreen out of food and wine.
That is brilliant.
He invited the rival general to a lavish, incredibly distracting multi-day banquet at the capital. It was framed as an event to honor the general and discuss terms of peace and integration.
He uses the veneer of diplomacy and hospitality to completely disarm the general's paranoia.
The banquet was a masterpiece of cognitive overload. There was endless food, music, flattery, and complex protocol. While the general was occupied with the feasts, lulled into a false sense of security and inflated importance, Selassie's operatives were quietly at work miles away.
They weren't attacking the general's army, though.
No, attacking them would have caused a rallying effect. Selassie's agents simply walked into the general's encampment with massive amounts of gold and quietly bribed the general's key lieutenants and soldiers.
Wow.
While the general was raising a glass at the banquet, his entire power base was literally bought off and scattered to the winds. By the time dessert was served and the general returned to his camp, he was a commander without an army.
He had been completely neutralized without a single drop of blood being spilled. That is the ultimate execution of concealing intentions. He projected an intention of negotiation and honor while executing an intention of total dismantlement.
And then we have Otto von Bismarck, the 19th century Prussian statesman. His use of Law 3 reshaped the map of Europe.
Bismarck's ultimate goal was the unification of Germany under Prussian dominance. To achieve this, he knew he eventually had to wage war against the Austrian Empire, which was the dominant power at the time.
But the timing was critical. His military was not yet ready for a full-scale conflict.
Right. If Bismarck had been transparent, if he had given speeches about his glorious vision for a unified Germany and the need to defeat Austria would have immediately crushed Prussia preemptively.
So Bismarck employed a masterclass in strategic ambiguity. He deliberately delayed this untimely war by publicly, loudly praising Austria.
Praising them.
Yes, he proposed joint alliances. He advocated for peaceful diplomatic resolutions to minor border disputes. He sent out a constant stream of signals indicating non-aggression, deference, and friendship.
He is smiling, bowing, and shaking hands on the diplomatic stage while frantically loading his political and military weapons in the back room.
He created so much contradictory noise and confusion about Prussia's true stance that Austrian leadership simply couldn't reach consensus on how to handle him.
And that delay was everything.
This strategic ambiguity bought Bismarck the years he needed to rapidly industrialize the Prussian military, develop new railway logistics, and quietly isolate Austria from potential allies like Russia and France.
When Bismarck finally dropped the facade and struck, the Prussian war machine was unstoppable, and Austria had no unified opposition ready to mount a defense. He won the war before the first shot was fired because he won the war of information.
Now, you might wonder, and it's a critical question to ask, how sustainable is this?
I really do wonder that. Listening to all these historical accounts, it sounds exhausting to maintain. If you are an operator and you are always dropping red herrings, talking endlessly about false goals just to hide your real ones, acting friendly when you are actually hostile, don't people just eventually figure it out?
You think so?
Don't they just stop believing anything you say entirely? If you're constantly blowing smoke, surely you lose all credibility and your ability to lead.
It's a very logical objection, but what is truly fascinating here, and what our Grokipedia source dives deep into, is how this strategy addresses that exact psychological vulnerability. It is not simply about lying. Lying is fragile. It breaks when exposed to truth.
Okay, so what is it then?
This strategy is about exploiting a very specific, hardwired cognitive quirk in the human brain. The mechanism relies on something behavioral economists call the Ellsberg paradox.
The Ellsberg paradox. Let's dig into the neuroscience of this. Why doesn't the brain just reject the liar?
In decision theory, the Ellsberg paradox demonstrates that human beings have an innate, deep-seated, almost biological aversion to ambiguity. We despise uncertainty.
We hate not knowing?
Exactly. When given a choice, the human brain will actually prefer a known risk, even a bad one, over an ambiguous probability where the odds are unknown.
We would rather know for sure that something bad is going to happen than live in the anxiety of not knowing what is going to happen.
We crave predictability so intensely that we will latch on to any clear narrative provided to us. When a tactician intentionally creates a fog of uncertainty, when they send mixed signals, act unpredictably, or offer a highly detailed decoy narrative, it literally paralyzes the opponent's decision-making apparatus.
Because the opponent's brain essentially short circuits. It is desperately trying to calculate the odds of survival, but it doesn't have reliable data. So it just freezes in an attempt to gather more information before acting.
Yes. The cognitive discomfort of not knowing what the other person is going to do causes hesitation. In politics, in corporate warfare, or on the battlefield, hesitation is fatal.
Right.
This hesitation prevents adversaries from uniting against you because they can't agree on what your actual threat level is. It deters preemptive strikes. By the time they have gathered enough information to feel cognitively comfortable making a decision, you have already executed your real plan.
So the smokescreen doesn't have to be perfectly believable forever. It doesn't have to hold up to years of scrutiny. It only has to cause enough cognitive paralysis for a small window of time, allowing you to slip past their defenses. That is wild.
It exploits the brain's need to resolve cognitive dissonance. If you give someone a decoy that is easier for their brain to process than the complex truth, they will often willfully adopt the decoy just to relieve the anxiety of uncertainty.
And it is crucial to recognize that this isn't just an ancient or 19th century phenomenon. This brings us to how this massive deception scaled up from battlefields to modern boardrooms. While ancient kings used banquets, the 20th and 21st century scaled this ambiguity using advanced technology, mass media, and corporate bureaucracy.
They absolutely do. The mechanics of the human brain haven't changed, only the tools we use to exploit them. Let's look at the military context in the 20th century. One of the most audacious deceptions in modern history was Operation Mincemeat during World War II.
This is a masterclass in providing the enemy's brain with the exact false certainty it craves.
The strategic situation was dire. The Allies desperately needed to invade Sicily to gain a foothold in Europe, but the Nazi high command knew Sicily was the logical target and had heavily fortified it. A direct assault would have been a bloodbath.
So, British intelligence decides to use Law 3. They plant a fake corpse in neutral waters off the coast of Spain, knowing the currents would wash it ashore where Spanish authorities, who were heavily infiltrated by Nazi spies, would find it.
They dressed a dead body as a Royal Marine officer, Major William Martin, a completely fabricated identity. But the genius wasn't the body, it was the pocket letter.
The pocket letter.
Yeah. They planted fake documents on this corpse, Incredibly detailed, painstakingly forged letters from high-level British officials.
The letters casually suggested that the Allies were actually planning massive invasions of Greece and Sardinia, and that Sicily was just going to be a feint, a distraction.
They provided the Nazi high command with a highly detailed, extremely plausible decoy narrative. It fed directly into the Ellsberg paradox. The Nazi commanders were dealing with the agonizing ambiguity of where the Allies would strike. These documents relieved that cognitive dissonance.
German intelligence intercepted the documents, subjected them to scrutiny, and ultimately swallowed the deception whole. They wanted to believe it because it gave them certainty.
And it worked.
They diverted massive amounts of troops, tanks, and artillery away from Sicily and sent them to Greece and Sardinia. When the Allies actually invaded Sicily, the resistance was a fraction of what it should have been. It saved countless Allied lives.
Fast forward a decade to the 1950s, and you see the United States deploying the exact same psychological architecture during the Cold War with the U-2 spy plane program. The CIA needed to fly high-altitude surveillance missions over Soviet territory to map military installations.
But they obviously couldn't announce, hey, we're flying spy planes over your airspace, because that would trigger an international incident, possibly World War III.
So the CIA disguised the entire covert military program as a benign civilian weather research initiative run by NASA. They didn't just deny they were spying, they provided a complete, boring, alternative reality.
They issued incredibly dry press releases about meteorological data collection, high-altitude cloud formations, and atmospheric sampling to normalize the flights.
They used the mundane nature of science as the ultimate, unquestionable smokescreen. It was so bland and bureaucratic that it deflected scrutiny. If you make your decoy boring enough, the human brain simply loses interest in investigating it.
And this framework translates flawlessly into the modern business world. The texts highlight the development of the original iPhone by Steve Jobs at Apple in the mid-2000s.
Apple was entering the fiercely competitive mobile phone market, dominated by giants like Nokia, Motorola, and BlackBerry. If those companies knew Apple was developing a touchscreen computer that could make calls, they would have mobilized their massive resources to crush Apple preemptively.
So Jobs initiated Project Purple. The level of secrecy and misdirection around this was legendary in Silicon Valley.
Jobs utilized extreme compartmentalization. Apple engineers working on the hardware had no idea what the software team was doing, and vice versa. They worked behind locked doors with badge readers.
They used dummy prototypes too, right?
Literally mounting the revolutionary software inside clunky, ugly cases that looked like old iPods, so that even if a vendor saw it, they wouldn't know what they were looking at.
They disguised the most disruptive product of the century as just a routine, slightly upgraded hardware iteration of the iPod. But the misdirection didn't stop in the R&D lab. Even on stage at the Macworld keynote in 2007, Jobs used the Ellsberg paradox.
He didn't walk out and instantly say, here is a revolutionary smartphone that will destroy the cellular industry.
He introduced it as 3 separate incremental devices. He said Apple was introducing a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device.
He repeated it until the audience realized he was talking about one single device. But for years leading up to that moment, he kept the competitors totally in the dark.
BlackBerry and Nokia couldn't mount a preemptive strategic response because they had no idea what they were actually responding to. They were expecting a phone with a physical keyboard. By the time the iPhone was revealed and the true intention was clear, Apple was already years ahead in development.
And the legacy companies were paralyzed, trying to understand a paradigm shift they never saw coming.
The sources also point out how this dynamic works every day in modern mergers and acquisitions. Negotiators will bluff complete disinterest in a target company to avoid triggering a massive bidding war.
They will intentionally leak rumors about being deeply interested in acquiring a completely different competitor just to distract the market analysts and keep the stock price of their true targets suppressed.
It is the corporate equivalent of Churchill's decoy fort.
Exactly.
It's exactly like a stage magician's misdirection. The secret to a magic trick isn't being invisible. It's about making sure the audience is staring so hard at your flashy, moving left hand that they completely ignore your quiet right hand reaching into their pocket.
That is the perfect analogy. You don't hide the truth by covering it up. You hide the truth by shining a massive spotlight on a lie. However, our Grokopedia source spends considerable time exploring the reversal of Law 3.
Right, the reversal.
In Greene's framework, every law has a reversal, a specific set of circumstances where applying the law will actually backfire and destroy you.
And in our modern, hyper-connected information age, the reversal for Law 3 is highly relevant. With digital audit trails, metadata, 247 news cycles, and whistleblower protections, maintaining absolute, ironclad, company-wide secrecy for long periods is nearly impossible.
Eventually, an encrypted email leaks. A disgruntled employee talks to the press. The text points to the catastrophic collapse of Enron in 2001 as the ultimate failure to understand the reversal of Law 3.
Enron tried to conceal massive, fatal corporate debt through incredibly complex off-balance sheet entities and shell companies.
They tried to maintain total structural deception for far too long. To keep a lie of that magnitude going requires exponentially more internal coordination every single day.
And it eventually just gave way.
The sheer gravitational weight of the deception caused it to collapse under routine regulatory scrutiny and the courage of internal whistleblowers. The architecture of their smokescreen became so complex that they tripped over it themselves.
So how does a modern strategist use Law 3 today, knowing that total permanent secrecy is a mathematical impossibility?
The modern evolution of this law is the practice of selective disclosure. You don't try to hide everything. Instead, you use non-disclosure agreements, you carefully construct PR narratives, and you drop partial, highly controlled leaks to the press.
You feed the beast.
Exactly. You give the market, your competitors, or your employees just enough accurate, low-stakes information to maintain your credibility. You make them feel like they are in the inner circle, privy to the truth.
You feed their psychological need for certainty with minor truths.
Which allows you to heavily guard your core vital objective in the shadows. You hide the needle by offering them a handful of hay and telling them it's the whole stack.
Wow. Okay, so we've spent a massive amount of time on the art of hiding things. We've covered how to hide your competence to bypass a boss's fragile ego. We've explored how to hide your trust to utilize rivals. And we've dissected how to hide your goals using decoys, red herrings, and selective disclosure.
That's a lot of hiding.
It is. But here's the critical pivot. If words are primarily used as smokescreens to confuse and misdirect people, as we just saw extensively in Law 3, how do you ever actually persuade someone of the truth?
That's the challenge.
When you desperately need someone to agree with you, to see your vision, or to fund your project, how do you win them over if words are so fundamentally untrustworthy?
This dilemma brings us directly to the synthesis of Law 9 and Law 30, which govern the mechanics of persuasion and the projection of authority. Law 9 states, win through your actions, never through argument.
I absolutely love this one because it runs counter to everything we are taught in our education system. We are deeply conditioned to believe in the power of the debate.
We really are.
We think that if we just construct the perfectly logical argument, if we bring the best statistics, the finest PowerPoint presentation, we will inevitably win the room.
It is a fundamentally flawed assumption about human neurology. Engaging in a verbal argument creates what the text refers to as a Pyrrhic victory.
A victory where the cost of winning is so high, it equates to a defeat.
Precisely. Let's say you engage in a heated debate with a colleague or a superior. Even if you completely dismantle their logic, expose the flaws in their statistics, and undeniably win the debate in front of an audience, what have you actually achieved?
You've made an Emmy.
You have almost certainly stirred up deep, lasting resentment.
Because you didn't just defeat their idea, you made them feel foolish. You back them into a cognitive corner and attack their ego.
And as we established with Law 1, attacking someone's ego triggers a fight-or-flight response. When a person's core beliefs or competence are verbally challenged, the amygdala in their brain flares up.
They get defensive.
They experience the backfire effect, where they actually double down on their original incorrect belief simply to defend their identity.
A momentary feeling of triumph from winning an argument is never worth the silent, long-term ill will it generates. People inherently distrust words. They know that a clever debater can twist logic, employ logical fallacies, or cherry-pick data to win a point.
But demonstration, physical, undeniable action, that bypasses the defensive, skeptical filters of the cerebral cortex entirely. Words are subjective, actions are objective reality.
The primary historical example the texts provide here is simply fantastic, and it perfectly illustrates how to bypass the ego. We look at Sir Christopher Wren, the legendary British architect in the 17th century.
Oh, brilliant mind.
He is commissioned to build a new town hall for the city of Westminster.
Wren is a master architect, a mathematician, and an engineer. He designs a brilliant, airy, modern structure.
The town hall is built, and the mayor of Westminster comes in to inspect it. The mayor looks at the design of the first floor, which features a sprawling, open space. But then the mayor looks up, and he becomes absolutely terrified.
He believes that the second floor is vastly too heavy and that it is inevitably going to collapse and crush his office, which is located on the first floor.
Now, Wren understands physics. He understands load-bearing calculations. He knows with absolute mathematical certainty that the ceiling is perfectly safe and structurally sound.
Wren has a choice. He could have pulled out the massive blueprints. He could have argued with the mayor, done the complex trigonometry on a chalkboard, and aggressively proved the mayor wrong.
But if he did that, what is he actually saying to the most powerful man in the city? He is saying, you are uneducated in engineering, and I am intellectually superior to you.
Which, according to the laws of power, is a fatal dynamic mistake. You never humiliate the person who signs your checks.
So what does Wren do? He doesn't argue physics. He simply nods and says, you're absolutely right, Mr. Mayor. The design is flawed. I will fix it immediately. And Wren proceeds to build two massive, solid stone pillars right in the middle of the mayor's office to hold up the ceiling.
The mayor's thrilled, he feels safe, he feels respected, and most importantly, he feels that his authority was listened to.
But the punchline is incredible. Years later, long after the mayor has passed away, a workman gets up on a tall ladder to do some maintenance and looks closely at the top of those two massive pillars.
They didn't even reach the ceiling.
They were entirely fake. They stopped a few inches short of the ceiling. They supported absolutely zero weight. They were an architectural placebo.
It's amazing.
Wren changed the mayor's entire physical vantage point and emotional state without arguing a single word of physics.
There is a remarkably similar parallel story involving the great Renaissance artist Michelangelo. He is carving the legendary statue of David out of a massive block of marble.
Another genius.
The mayor of Florence, a powerful patron, comes to inspect the work in progress. The mayor looks up at the towering statue and declares, "The nose is too big. It ruins the face."
Again, Michelangelo is a master anatomist. He knows the proportions are divine. But he doesn't argue art theory. He doesn't lecture the mayor on perspective.
Instead, Michelangelo subtly invites the mayor to climb up the scaffolding with him to get a closer look. As he climbs, Michelangelo quietly grabs a handful of loose marble dust from the planks.
He's prepared.
He reaches the face, takes his chisel, and begins to tap lightly against the nose, carefully letting the pre-gathered dust fall from his hand. He hasn't altered the actual marble of the nose by a single millimeter.
He steps back and asks the mayor what he thinks now.
And the mayor, brushing the dust off his coat, says, "Ah, perfect. You have brought it to life. It is much better."
By demonstrating in action rather than arguing a point, you completely bypass the other person's ego defenses. You let them feel like they are in control, that they arrived at the conclusion themselves. You give them the illusion of dominance while you quietly retain total control over the actual outcome.
This strategy synthesizes beautifully with Law 4. Always say less than necessary. When you argue, you inevitably talk too much.
You reveal your desperation to be understood.
Exactly. You end up saying things you regret and you look common and reactive. By acting silently or by executing a simple demonstration, you retain an aura of mystery, control, and unshakable authority.
And that aura of mystery ties directly into Law 30. Make your accomplishments seem effortless. During the Renaissance, the Italians coined a specific term for this, sprezzatura.
Yes, sprezzatura. The art of making the difficult look absurdly easy. The law dictates that you must never show how hard you work behind the scenes.
Because if people see the agonizing toil, the sweat, the doubts, the countless hours of frantic practice, it ruins the magical illusion of power.
It grounds you. It makes you look human, vulnerable, and exhausted.
You want your audience, your peers, and your superiors to believe that your brilliance just flows naturally, like a force of nature. If they see the grinding mechanics of how you achieve your results, they might realize that with enough hard work, they could easily replicate what you do.
You strip away the mystique. If you keep the messy mechanics hidden in the dark, the final product looks like magic. And people are far more likely to be intimidated by and revere magic than they are hard work.
So we've covered an immense amount of ground. We've dissected how to hide your goals, how to navigate and bypass the fragile egos around you, and how to use concrete actions instead of flimsy words to persuade.
Now for the more aggressive side.
Right. Now, we must transition into the more uncompromising territory of the texts. How do master tacticians actively take control of the board? How do they lock others into doing their bidding without relying on overt coercion?
This is where we enter the realm of the architect of control. This phase involves a triad of highly structural strategies, laws 31, 11, and 33. Let's begin with the architecture of choice. Law 31 commands, control the options, get others to play with the cards you deal.
The principle here is that the absolute best, most effective deceptions are the ones that seem to give the other person complete freedom of choice.
It is the weaponization of the illusion of choice. Your targets feel they are entirely in control of their own destiny, making independent executive decisions, but they are actually operating as your pieces on the board.
You set the menu.
The strategy is to carefully curate and present a menu of options that all subtly lead to the exact outcome you desire, regardless of which one they pick.
The texts provide a chillingly effective modern example of this, citing former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and his management of President Richard Nixon.
Kissinger was a maestro of this specific psychological manipulation. When presenting complex foreign policy crises to Nixon, Kissinger understood his boss's psychology. Nixon was notoriously insecure, deeply paranoid, and possessed a desperate need to feel like the alpha, the brilliant commander-in-chief making the tough, independent calls.
If Kissinger had simply walked into the Oval Office and said, "Mr. President, here's the one correct option we must take," Nixon likely would have rejected it out of hand, simply to prove that Kissinger didn't control him.
Exactly. So Kissinger never presented just one option. He would present a carefully tailored menu of 3 or 4 distinct options, but he would heavily color the choices.
He stacked the deck.
He would frame the extreme options as completely unhinged, dangerous, and politically disastrous. He would use terrifying language to describe the outcomes of the choices he didn't want.
He made the alternatives look like apocalyptic failures, framing the briefing so that Kissinger's own preferred, pre-selected choice looked like the only sane, rational, and statesmanlike path available.
He painted Nixon into a cognitive corner, but he graciously handed Nixon the brush. Nixon felt the rush of executive power, believing he was making a brilliant, independent deduction, but he was simply walking down a psychological hallway that Kissinger had built specifically for him.
You force them to choose between the lesser of 2 manufactured disasters, both of which serve your ultimate purpose. It's brilliant, and it pairs seamlessly with the structural control outlined in Law 11. Learn to keep people dependent on you.
We return to the master of 19th century geopolitics, Otto von Bismarck.
Yes, Bismarck again.
Throughout his career, Bismarck served as chancellor under 2 different Prussian kings, both of whom were relatively weak, indecisive, and easily swayed. Now, a lesser strategist might have tried to overthrow these weak kings or stage a coup to seize the crown directly.
But Bismarck understood that wearing the crown makes you a massive, highly visible target.
So instead of seizing the throne, Bismarck made himself the indispensable humming engine behind the throne. He systematically involved himself in every single intricate, complex detail of the state's bureaucracy, foreign alliances, and military logistics.
He made himself the center of everything.
He tangled the wires of government so thoroughly around himself that making a move without his knowledge was impossible.
He made it so that firing him, or trying to operate without him, would instantly plunge the entire nation into administrative and diplomatic chaos.
By rendering himself entirely needed, by monopolizing the competence of the state, he gained total freedom to pursue his own audacious goals, because the kings were too terrified of the fallout to ever remove him.
He became the engine of the car. You might own the car, but you can't fire the engine and expect to go anywhere. And that concept of finding leverage leads us to what might be the most intensely psychological law we've discussed today. Law 33. Discover each man's thumbscrew.
A thumbscrew is a medieval interrogation device, which sets the tone for this law perfectly. The premise is that every single person, no matter how powerful or stoic they appear, has a psychological weakness, a crack in the castle wall.
A vulnerability.
It is usually a deep-seated insecurity, an unfillable emotional void from childhood, an uncontrollable need for validation, or a secret, private pleasure.
If you can locate that specific weakness, that is their thumbscrew. And once you find it, you can apply pressure to control them.
The texts return to Bismarck for a masterclass in this exact tactic. Bismarck desperately needs to get an Austrian diplomat, Count Blum, to sign a highly complex treaty. The treaty is objectively terrible for Austria's long-term interests, but fantastic for Prussia.
And Blum is an experienced, skeptical negotiator. How does Bismarck get him to sign it?
He doesn't just walk into the negotiating room and start arguing terms. He profiles him. He gathers intelligence on Blum's personal life.
He finds the crack.
Bismarck discovers that beneath the diplomatic exterior, Blum's true thumbscrews are his immense personal vanity and his absolute obsession with gambling, specifically a card game called Kunz.
So, knowing this, Bismarck orchestrates a situation. He challenges Count Bloom to a high-stakes game of kins the night before the official treaty negotiations are scheduled to begin.
And during the game, Bismarck, who is actually a highly intelligent and calculated man, intentionally plays terribly. He plays recklessly, he makes rash, foolish comments, he miscalculates odds, and he acts like an impulsive amateur. He deliberately loses a significant amount of money to Bloom.
By playing the absolute sucker, Bismarck directly massages Bloom's thumbscrew of vanity. Bloom's ego inflates massively. He looks across the card table and thinks, this legendary Bismarck is actually an impulsive fool. I am vastly intellectually superior to him.
Bismarck lulled Bloom into a state of supreme, arrogant cognitive security.
So the next morning, when they sit down at the negotiating table, Bloom is feeling incredibly smart, dominant, and completely secure in his superiority. Because he assumes Bismarck is an amateur, Bloom barely even reads the fine print of the incredibly dense treaty.
He just signs it.
He signs it, confidently believing he has the upper hand. He played right into Prussia's geopolitical trap because Bismarck knew exactly which psychological button to push to shut down Bloom's critical thinking.
When you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, you realize this isn't just parlor trickery or simple lying. This is elite, weaponized psychological profiling. By mirroring others, by intentionally playing a sucker to catch a sucker, which is the core of Law 21, you lower their defenses.
You gather the raw intelligence needed to map their psyche, you find out exactly what they lack, and you either provide it to create dependency or you use it as leverage against them. I want to stop and genuinely question the underlying philosophy here. As fascinating as this is from a pure, detached, strategic standpoint, watching Bismarck play multidimensional chess, what is the ethical toll of adopting this mindset?
It's a vital question.
The text actually touches on this friction, bringing in the contrast between Kantian ethics and utilitarianism. Are we just accepting a worldview where we treat human beings purely as a means to an end? Is there a point where controlling the options and constantly hunting for your coworkers' thumbscrews just becomes corrosive manipulation that ultimately isolates you?
It is a profound, necessary question, and it's one the texts grapple with extensively. If we look at it through the lens of Kantian ethics, the answer is a resounding yes, this is unethical. Immanuel Kant argued for the categorical imperative: you must treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, always as an end in itself, and never merely as a means to an end.
Meaning you respect their autonomy. You don't use them like a tool to get what you want.
Correct. Deceiving someone, manipulating their choices through false options, exploiting their deepest insecurities, all of these actions strip the target of their autonomy and dignity. By the strict Kantian standard, the laws of power violate that autonomy.
Because you're playing people like an instrument.
However, the texts also present the utilitarian perspective. A utilitarian evaluates the morality of an action based on its consequences, the greatest good for the greatest number. From this viewpoint, one might argue that if these tactics result in a massive net good, they are justified.
Like the examples we saw.
Exactly. Bismarck unified a fractured Germany, creating a period of relative stability. Haile Selassie avoided a devastating, bloody civil war that would have killed thousands of peasants simply by bribing an army instead of fighting it.
He used a smokescreen to save lives.
Exactly. The texts themselves remain steadfastly impartial. They do not endorse the morality of these laws, nor do they condemn them. They operate on the premise of political realism. They simply report that the world is this way.
Right.
The texts acknowledge that a life of pervasive suspicion and constant maneuvering can erode the social fabric and lead to deep personal isolation. But they also firmly note that if you refuse to learn these mechanisms out of a sense of rigid moral purity, you are effectively leaving yourself entirely defenseless against the operators who will use them against you.
It's a field manual, not a moral compass. It describes the terrain as it actually exists, not as we wish it were in a perfect world. Which brings us, inevitably, to the end game.
Every game has an end game.
Every game of power, whether in a corporate boardroom, a political campaign, or a social circle, eventually reaches a conclusion. The sources outline two absolute extremes of how to finalize your position in the hierarchy. One strategy is aggressively offensive, and the other is the ultimate untouchable defense.
Let's examine the offensive extreme first. Law 15, crush your enemy totally.
It sounds so incredibly archaic.
It is deeply rooted in historical conflicts because the stakes of power were often life and death. The text heavily cites the Medici family during the Renaissance in Florence. The Medicis understood a fundamental law of conflict. If you engage in a war with a rival family and you defeat them but leave them with any remaining sliver of power, wealth, or influence, if you leave even one ember smoldering in the ashes, a fire will eventually break out again.
Because human nature dictates retaliation.
Precisely. Enemies left with half measures will recover. They will harbor deep, festering resentment for the humiliation you caused them, and they will spend years quietly plotting their comeback. The law states that more is ultimately lost through stopping halfway and showing mercy than through total, absolute neutralization of the threat.
But how do we apply that today? We aren't 15th century Italian nobility. If I have a bitter rival in my accounting firm, I can't just hire mercenaries to banish them from the city-state and burn their house down.
Thankfully, no. In a modern, civilized context, crushing an enemy totally rarely involves literal physical confrontation. Today, it means legally, financially, or professionally neutralizing a threat so thoroughly and comprehensively that they absolutely cannot mount a counterattack.
So it's about removing their leverage entirely.
It means dismantling their power base. It might mean winning a corporate lawsuit so decisively that the rival company is dissolved. In a corporate power struggle, it might mean ensuring that a hostile rival is not just transferred to another department where they can still undermine you, but cleanly terminated from the company entirely with ironclad severance agreements that prevent them from poaching clients.
It's about ensuring there is zero structural avenue for retaliation. The lesson is, if you are forced to enter a serious conflict, you do not do it halfway. If you shoot for the king, you best not miss. Just like Richelieu neutralizing his rivals at the French court total removal of their influence.
Exactly.
But what about the other side of the spectrum? The defensive posture. This brings us to Law 48, which is the final law in the framework, and perhaps the most difficult to master. Assume formlessness.
This is undoubtedly the most philosophical and abstract law in the entire text. It relies on the concept that by taking a rigid, predictable shape, by having a highly visible plan, a strict ideology, or a predictable set of behaviors, you inadvertently give your adversaries a target.
If people know exactly who you are, what you stand for, and how you react to stress, they know exactly where to strike.
They can easily map your psychology and find your thumbscrew. If you are rigid, you can be broken. The law dictates that instead of taking a solid form for your opponent to grasp, you must train yourself to be completely adaptable. You must be as fluid, formless, and reactive as water.
Like Machiavelli's concept of virtue adapting to fortuna.
Exactly that. The premier historical example the texts provide here is T.E. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, during the Arab Revolt in World War I.
This is a perfect illustration. He is advising the Arab forces, and they are fighting the Ottoman Turks. The Turks have a massive, traditional, highly structured, rigid military machine.
The Turks relied on static defense, heavy artillery, and predictable supply lines. Lawrence realized that if the much smaller, lightly armed Arab forces tried to fight a traditional set-piece battle, if they took a solid military form, they would be instantly crushed by the sheer weight of the Ottoman army.
So Lawrence adopts a strategy of absolute formlessness. He utilizes the vast, unmapped desert.
His forces became ghosts. They faded into the dunes. They presented no centralized camp, no capital city to capture, no front line to bombard. They would strike suddenly out of nowhere, destroy a critical railway or supply line, and then instantly vanish back into the harsh desert before the Turks could even organize a counterattack.
The Turkish army wasted. Nobody can predict your intentions because you are constantly adapting to the present reality rather than clinging to a past plan. But applying this in real life requires something incredibly difficult, something most people can't do. It requires completely shedding your own ego.
That is the crux of the difficulty. To be truly formless, you have to take nothing personally. You cannot be rigidly attached to your own identity, your past successes, or the desperate need to be perceived as right. When the environment changes, you must shed your old form instantly to survive and thrive.
It's the highest level of strategic mastery. It's not just passively going with the flow and letting people push you around. It is an active, hyper-aware, strategic fluidity. You accept the fundamental truth that nothing is certain, no law is permanently fixed, and you respond to the reality of the moment rather than the rigidity of your ego.
You recognize that power isn't a static object you put in a vault. It is a dynamic, constantly shifting relationship between people.
As we wrap up this massive deep dive, I want to take a moment to remind you, the listener, why spending this time dissecting the mechanics of deception, ego, and leverage is actually vital to your well-being. The 48 laws are not a mandate to become an operator. They are not an instruction manual for being a terrible person.
No, they are a profound, unvarnished, and deeply realistic field guide to human nature.
By understanding exactly how decoys are deployed, how the illusion of choice is constructed by those above you, and how your own ego can be weaponized against you, you forge an incredible psychological armor.
You ensure that you are no longer the blind pawn in someone else's shadow game.
Whether you choose to wield these laws to advance your own goals or simply use this knowledge to defend yourself against toxic environments, you must know that these mechanics exist. So as you step back out into the world, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over during your commute or your next staff meeting.
It's a good one.
Take a very close look at your workplace, your broader social circle, or even the political media you consume daily. Who around you is successfully remaining formless? Who is quietly pulling the strings, setting the options without ever getting their own hands dirty?
And turn the lens inward, too.
Absolutely. If a modern-day Bismarck were sitting across the table from you right now, trying to find your thumbscrew, what deep insecurity, what unfulfilled desire, or what need for validation are you unconsciously broadcasting to the world?
It is a heavy question, but answering it is the first step to true autonomy.
Think back to that vending machine we talked about at the very beginning. Maybe it's time to stop just pressing the buttons, blindly hoping the system is fair, and start paying close attention to who is actually holding the keys to the machine.
Knowing the laws is one thing. Learning to read them in real time, that's tomorrow.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you a new lens through which to view the world. Stay curious, stay observant, and we will see you next time.